What are some best tips and practices on how to incorporate digital into your ministry? Find out in a second because it's time.
You're listening to the Church Digital Sidekick Podcast, part of the TCD Podcast Network.
Hey heroes, my name is Tom Pounder and this is the Church Digital Sidekick Podcast. This is the podcast where we bring on ministry leaders. We talk about how you can do ministry more effectively in this very digital and online world. And today I've got a friend of mine back on the podcast. It's been way too long since Christopher Wesley has been back on the podcast, but today he is a youth minister outside of Baltimore, Maryland, and today we talk about how to incorporate digital into your ministry more. What are some of the pitfalls? What are some of the benefits of it? And what are some ultimately best practices for how to do that? Today we talk about it, so I'm really excited to have him on the podcast. But before we get into the interview, I do want to highlight the Church Digital. At the Church Digital, we have tons of blog content, podcasts, cohorts, coaching, videos that will help you in your ministry incorporate digital into its ministry. Whether it's physical ministry where you're incorporating the physical and digital together, whether it's only online, or whether it's even metaverse ministry, whatever you're looking for, we've got it at the Church Digital. So if you've never checked out thechurch.digital, that's the website, go to it today so you can get encouragement in your online ministry efforts. All right, so without any further ado, let's get into the interview with Christopher Wesley. All right, with me right now is my friend Christopher Wesley. Chris, how are you?
Tom, I am doing fantastic. I know it's been a minute since we've chatted, but hey, that's things, right? Life moves and moves quickly.
It does. It does. I think we were talking about podcasting again back in the spring, and then just because you're so busy, you're just like, here, let's do this, and then let's do this, and I'm like, man, I'll do whatever it takes to get Chris back on the podcast.
Yeah, and Tom's not exaggerating. I've been busy, it's been crazy. I mean, ministry has just been crazy. Life's been crazy, but all is good in the Wesley household. So that's all
fantastic.
that matters. Yeah.
Well, let's do a quick little intro. You've been on my podcast a number of times, so a lot of people should know who you are. But just in case someone doesn't know who you are, talk to me a little bit about that.
Well, so much changes. So again, Christopher Wesley, I'm the founder of Marathon Youth Ministry, which we're an organization that offers coaching, cohorts, and content to help ministry leaders rediscover the joy of serving in ministry. And what do we mean by rediscovering the joy? Well, let's just say that ministry is tough and it's hard and it can lead to burnout. So in those services that we offer, we talk about time management, we talk about investing in certain tools. And so a lot of it's focused on human formation, right? How we function as humans, but also, practical formation of how do you actually do ministry with especially young people and their families.
Yeah.
In addition to that, I am in parish ministry in a local church up here in Baltimore, and I have taken on many different titles from youth minister to director of youth ministry, and now my official title is director of formation ministries, which basically means everything from cradle to grave of the discipleship and catechesis of our parishioners at St. Joseph's.
Dude, that's awesome. That's congratulations on that. Again, if you're listening to this, you're like, I have no idea what that is. Again, just think it's family ministry of sorts, and Chris is there, and Chris has had tons of experience with youth ministry. Again, I think I'm older than you, but you've been doing ministry for a very long time. How long have you been doing full-time ministry?
Yes, Tom looks younger than me, but he is older than me. But yeah, I've been doing ministry 19 years this past August. So
awesome.
Yeah, in my 20th year of ministry, and it's crazy to think about how much has changed in the landscape of how we do ministry over that time.
Yeah, well, it really has. I mean, again, that's like 2 decades of ministry. And yeah, so Chris has seen it all, especially he's seen the incorporation of digital ministry into because when Chris and I first started doing ministry, we didn't have that kind of stuff. I mean, did you have a Palm Pilot, by the way?
No, I didn't have a Palm Pilot. I mean, I remember in my first couple of years of youth ministry having conversations with parents who didn't like that I was relying so heavily on email. They're like, Chris, can you try, you know, handing our kids more printouts? You know, when you announce it, can you mail out, do some mailers and stuff like that? And so that kind of cracks me up. I mean, we're talking about pre-Facebook days, early Friendster, MySpace was kind of out there, sort of thing. Like, no Palm Pilot. I somehow missed that whole phase of things, but yeah, brick phone for sure.
Yeah, when I used to have a day timer, those day timer planners, and then when the Palm Pilot came out, I was like, I gotta have one of those, and so that kind of started my trek with digital, incorporating digital
Hmm.
ministry. But I love that, and again, I love reflecting on some of the old things that we used to do and the new things we do, because honestly, when the pandemic hit, you were in youth ministry, and but you took on the role of getting your church up on digital. So talk to me a little bit about that. We've talked about it in a previous episode, but
Sure.
briefly just to talk to me about what you all had to do.
Yeah, so we were a church that I wouldn't say was averse to technology before the pandemic, but was definitely not something we were fully engaged in regards to live streaming, video screens, all that kind of stuff. And so when the pandemic happened, right, a lot of churches were put in that situation of, okay, how do we get Jesus to the masses, right? And so um with my background at my previous church, and I was an electronic media communications major in college, I decided, I was like, you know what, I know enough people and know enough to be dangerous. So I said, let's take on live streaming our weekend mass. And yeah, basically just did like a quick crash course through YouTube, calling people, emailing people I knew who were doing it at their churches, and just say, what's the quickest and best way to get started? And so we did everything from using our iPhones and these little cameras called Mevo cameras, which were an excellent way to get started. We were broadcasting through Vimeo at first, and then it was definitely becoming one of those things where we were getting more and more into it. And we finally reached out to our parish and our parishioners and said, like, hey, we need some money to really invest in the equipment. And we were able to raise a couple of thousands of dollars within a few days to invest in a company that gave us, like, real standard uh, cameras and soundboard and mixing board and all that kind of stuff. And we're able to go from 0 to 60 like in a matter of weeks. I can't tell you though, Tom, how many fails we had from in the middle of Holy Week, the Wi-Fi crashing on
Oh,
us, and having to stop. And I can't speak for other denominations, but in the Catholic Church, once mass gets rolling, you don't stop it. I had to stop it because no one outside of the sanctuary was experiencing the mass, and so we had to reboot the Wi-Fi and restart Holy Thursday liturgy there. From things breaking and rewiring and MacGyvering it all together. Yeah, it was a fun yet exhausting year, and I'm kind of glad I moved out of our live streaming responsibilities
yeah,
at the parish.
but that's cool that how God used your background to help really help your parish get going.
I could finally call my parents and said, "Hey, all that money you spent on my degree, I'm using it now." So yeah.
That is so true. That is very true. Well, I'll just say this because I still have many, many tech fails. In fact, 2 weeks ago, we just had a tech fail at our church, and it's like, why are we still having these issues? I mean, our church has been doing live streaming stuff for about 9 years now, and it's like, why are we still having these issues? So, oh
Well,
well.
it's because humans are using it. I mean, we could even go back to remember how when you wanted to show a video, you had to queue up the DVD or the VHS, like to show the teens and stuff like that. I'll
Yep.
never forget my first year of ministry, my supervisor, he was showing me like what he does, and he wanted to show a clip from Big Daddy, the Adam
Yeah.
Sandler film, and he had it queued up on the wrong scene, and it was probably the most inappropriate scene you could show a bunch of middle school students. And it was like one of those things where teenagers hitting play on the VCR, and the scene is showing, and he's like, no, stop, stop. And it's like one of those things where you can't cue it up easily and everything, but that was a fun time. So
Oh, the good old days, the good old
Mhm.
days. Let's be honest. Okay, well, thanks for sharing with us a little bit of your background. Again, I always love having you on the podcast, and I love you. You've got tons of great content on your website, Marathon Youth Ministry. And if you've never checked out his blog and his website, it's marathonyouthministry.com. I'll have all the links on the show notes. But you had a great post that I really wanted to talk about because again, I talk about digital stuff, and your blog post is called "Embracing the Digital World with Ministry." So we're
Mhm.
going to go just through a few points on here and just get your feedback and your thoughts on this, and kind of expand on some of the stuff. But why did you choose? Again, your blog is very much centered on practical stuff that you can do in your ministry. Why did you choose to talk about this?
'Cause, I think, like, for a long time, we've looked at technology as a luxury in ministry, right? Like, "Hey, we've got projectors and screens and, huge soundboards and et cetera." And even though those are all technological, they do fit into kind of a separate world of audio-visual technology, and that's just a portion of what I mean by technology, right? Like when we're talking about technology, we're talking about how do we use our phones? How do we use our database systems? How do we use, multimedia platforms and things along those lines? And I think anyone who doesn't get excited about technology and hears those things gets overwhelmed.
Mhm.
So I kind of wanted to write a post just about how do we embrace the digital world in a practical way. And so the story that I used was just basically how we started to use electronic check-in, which um, again is something that I'm sure several churches and especially your listeners have probably engaged in, whether they're using planning center online or ministry platform or church builder or any of those different softwares. But for a church like ours, which again has been slower in the past to embrace technology, I've been reflecting a lot of like, okay, what are those ways that we can embrace it, and what are the truths around technology that I think we have to um, take into consideration. Otherwise, then if we just keep on having these fails and negative experiences with technology, then we're going to be adverse to it, and that's not the right path.
Yeah, no, 100%, and I think you're 100% right on that. Again, I think there's a lot of great things that we can use technology for, but it also can be overwhelming
Mhm.
and whatnot. Even for me, who's thinking about some of the stuff with AI and some of the other things that are up in front and center right now. And so that's why I like when you say in your very first point, you said it's an accelerator, so proceed with caution. Okay,
Mhm.
that's what I love that you say, just proceed with caution. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so a lot of that we experienced definitely with the live stream thing, right? Because as soon as we were live streaming our mass, everyone was seeing all of our mistakes and all of our flaws, right? Like when you're in person with certain things, you can hide some of those mistakes, but with technology, it gets out there quicker. Probably my favorite fail of recent memory was I was using I was sending out a mass email to all of our families of kids just about the start of our faith formation year. This was about a year ago, using our new database system. And I was trying to use tokens, which, if people aren't familiar with tokens, basically it's a piece of code that you put into an email and it auto generates like someone's name and everything like that. And so that's how I can send one general email right to thousands of people, but personalize it with these tokens. And I had clicked the wrong token. Instead of using the recipient's token, I clicked user token.
Hmm.
So I sent 1,000 emails to all these people addressed to, hey, dear Chris, we're so excited that you're going to come to ministry. And so I had parents all of a sudden emailing me, being like, hey, my kid's name is Jonathan or Tyler or Sarah, and you sent it to Chris. I hope you get it to the right family. And so it's just like my wife made fun of me for it because she likes to do that stuff, but that was an example of how that one simple mistake got accelerated, sent out to thousands of people, and or hundreds of people in this case. And again, you got to check your work.
Yeah. No, 100%. You got to check your work, and also I like the idea of, I think of it too in this sense of when new stuff comes out, there's always those first adopters, those early adopters that are like all in. Remember when Clubhouse came out?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
Everybody was all in. I got to get on Clubhouse. I got to get on Clubhouse. And now nobody's on Clubhouse except for like crypto people or something like that. I mean, and so it's like everyone's quick to jump in and say, this is the new thing. This is the new thing. AI was kind of the same thing, although AI's got definitely, more legs to that. But I think that the initial thing of, hey, I got to jump all in, all in, all in. And I like what you said, and you even talked to this in a later point too, is like proceed with caution and make sure you got all the things lined up and make sure you're using it appropriately, but also make sure you're learning about it. You're learning the best ways to use it so that you can be using it effectively. You can, with technology, you can do so many different things. You got to make sure you take it slow rather than go all in and make mistakes.
Yeah, and that brought brings to the second point, right? Dedicate time to learn this stuff because, like you said, we'll just sign up and not think twice about it. And you know, social media is a great example of that too. We're like, oh, I got to have an Instagram, a Snapchat, a TikTok, and recognizing that that might not work for your ministry, and that can be very difficult to embrace. But if you're not willing to dedicate the time to really learning how to do it properly and what works, then you could be wasting a lot of energy and even money on certain tools. And I think like live streaming is a great example of this, of how many churches invested in live stream and all this technology, and recognizing that people are really thirsting to be back in person.
Yeah.
And even though live stream, I do believe, has a place, now there's a lot of churches who are sitting with thousands of dollars of equipment, like just gaining dust, in the background. So
Yeah, and that's a great point. You don't have to invest the high level of the most expensive stuff. Like for instance, the worship director and I, we wanted to tell people stories. We wanted to find a way to help people tell their stories, and so we felt like, hey, let's create a podcast separate from our normal church podcast. Let's create a podcast where we're interviewing people, and we've discovered it's been fantastic. We've only been doing it for about 2 months now, but the idea would be like, hey, we're going to invest all this equipment and all this stuff, and we're like, let's just take it slow. Let's make
right.
sure we're doing it right, and let's make sure this is actually effective, like people like it. So what we've been doing is, as it's gaining steam and people are really excited about it, we've bought a new mic, or we
Mm-hmm.
did this. We still are not perfect, but we're taking it slow, so we're learning how to do all the stuff rather than jumping all in and getting all crazy and wasting a ton of money.
100% right. 100% right about that. And we live in an age too where there's not a shortage of information on how to use this, from tutorials on YouTube to reaching out to other churches and people who are engaged in this technology. The worst thing for us to do is just to jump on Amazon or B&H and just like buy all this equipment without like talking to people or watching tutorials on like what works best for you.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would say too, Amazon has so many options for equipment. You don't need to spend thousands of dollars. Again, I always like to say, with me as the online minister, I use my smartphone as my video, and I bought a $15 tripod off of Amazon. That's what I use.
Yeah.
I don't have all this fancy lighting or anything like that. I just simply use I try as best to have good lighting and whatnot. But again, it's like I don't need all this hundreds of dollars of equipment to be effective.
Definitely for sure.
Okay, one other thing I want to talk about, because I want to encourage people to go to your blog and read the article itself. But I like how you said towards the end is that it's not a silver bullet.
Right.
It's not a silver bullet. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, I mean, if you expect to create a social media handle or live stream or anything along those lines to bring kids in, or not just kids, but people into your church, then you've identified the tool, but not necessarily the process, right? Because just having those things is not going to fix all of your problems. And I think one place where this really is prevalent is when it comes to our content, right? I think there's great video content out there. I think there's incredible digital content out there, but that's not going to make disciples. Research is showing that what young people, especially young people, are craving is a sense of belonging and connecting. And while you and I, Tom, right, can like connect via Zoom or over the phone, there's nothing better than doing it in person. And so technology is not going to make disciples on its own. It's the people who are running it and using it well that are going to make that happen. And so we have to figure out how technology can assist us in the call to evangelize, but we definitely, it can't replace that by any means. And it's not a silver bullet, but it's definitely an effective tool, but it has to be used well and with intention and strategy.
Yeah, well, I think you hit the nail on the head right there, is that it's an effective tool that
Mhm.
we can have in our ministry toolbox as ministers. Again, there are things that we need to do to be effective, and incorporating digital can be really powerful. It can be really helpful. Again, that is my ministry as an online minister, is I'm doing that. But here's the deal. I try to get with some of these online people in person as much as possible. I need that human interaction. I need that connection, and so do other people. Now, again, some situations preclude that, but the reality is that it's not going to fix all your issues. Your
Right.
issue in reaching more people for Christ is not centered on we need a Threads account right now, or we need to be on YouTube or TikTok. Again, as you said earlier, you have to decide what's right for your church and your ministry. And so being on Threads or TikTok or YouTube may not be the right thing. Just because Chris is using it appropriately doesn't mean it's great for Tom and what I'm trying to accomplish in my ministry. And so I think you hit the nail on the head on that.
Well, and let me say one more thing about that too. I think we have to show, especially our young people, how to use technology correctly. And and so what that means is sometimes eliminating it from your ministry opportunities. So one quick example is that we just had a retreat for some of our high school students, and we banned cell phones. We said we're going to either collect them or you can just leave them at home. And one of the beautiful things about that weekend is that the students were disconnected and they weren't even asking for their phones back by the end of the retreat, because we had taught them the importance of silence and just listening to God's call and things along those lines. And I think we do a disservice when we just fill our ministries with noise that comes from technology, because then we're not showing them how to quiet themselves and listen for God's voices in that regards. So again, we should be teaching them how to evangelize with social media and technology and all those things, but we should also show them how to enter into prayer and rest without the noise and disconnect.
Yeah, because those are spiritual disciplines.
Hmm.
Solid
Hmm.
prayer, meditation, those are spiritual disciplines that we need to incorporate in our lives. And let's just be honest, I love technology, but um I will say, based on what we're hearing and the statistics that are coming out, and the fact that all these states are now suing social media platforms, we know that they're doing harm to our young people.
Hmm.
The sooner they get the smartphone in their hand, there's harm to it. And the people cannot, as you know, people like to say, social media is not social. It's like, it's just a consumption, and there's so much more loneliness, there's so much more depression, so much more anxiety amongst our young students today, that doing things like this is actually a benefit to them.
Hmm.
Taking away their phones when you're going on a retreat, and I'm hearing more and more people doing this, youth ministers doing this, and you're really helping people really navigate the digital world effectively by incorporating that kind of stuff into your ministry.
Yeah, yeah. So it's a double-edged sword. I mean, there's so many benefits to it. There's so many downsides to it, but we have to be sure that we're using technology in a place that helps us to really get to know people and embrace. And there's a lot of new technology out there with AI, blockchain technology, and all that stuff. And those things fascinate and intrigue me. And I think, Tom, we could spend a whole nother podcast on those things alone. But like, I do think that again, it's not about solely relying on technology, but it's also not being afraid of it at the same time.
Yeah, that's great. Well, as we wrap up, what kind of word of encouragement or advice would you share with people today? Maybe it's something you just said, but how would you encourage them as we kind of close up?
Yeah, my when you hear about something new and even if it sounds completely crazy, don't dismiss it. Learn about it so that you can discern and understand whether God wants you to use it as a part of your ministry. And I think we can look back at a bunch of case studies of where that's benefited us and where it hasn't, but like don't scoff at like new technology. Just take some time to learn about it and discern before you jump in or throw it away.
Yeah. So very true. Well, Chris, I always like to pump you up before you exit the podcast. But do you have anything coming up with Marathon Youth Ministry that you want to make people aware of?
Yeah, just we've got a monthly newsletter that comes out called MYM Premium. It's only $3.99 a month or $39 for the year. And each month we send you a little training video, articles, and downloadable tools that you can use to train your volunteers or even yourself. And so to sign up for that, just go to our website, marathonyouthministry.com, and you'll see a link for membership and just sign up right there.
Yeah, Chris has got a ton of great stuff. He's got a ton of great insights and encouragement. And for $3.99 or $39 a year, that's pocket change. And so I would encourage you to sign up for that and get that insights. Chris is a great guy, and he's got a lot of great helpful hits for all the ministers out there. So, Chris, as always, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Tom, I appreciate you and thank you for having me on.
Okay, so if you've ever heard a podcast with Chris and I before, we've had a number of them, but we always tend to talk about sports in some ways. He's a big New York guy. I'm big Washington D.C. and Dallas Cowboy guy. I know they don't always line up Washington D.C. and Dallas Cowboys, but we always end up talking about sports in some capacity. And today we didn't, and that was impressive. I even said to him, I'm like, "Hey, we didn't even mention sports today," and he's like, "Yeah, we didn't." But what encouraged you or challenged you from what Chris had to say? Again, I always like talking to him about the practical aspects of ministry, but he's been incorporating digital and online stuff into his ministry, and he's had a lot of experience with it over the years. And he gives us some really good best practices. So, what stood out to you? Put it in the comment section below or hit me up on Twitter at TA Pounders, my Twitter X handle. Chris, I'm going to include his Twitter and X handle in it as well. Share with us what stood out to you or what questions you might have or what you're experiencing with your ministry and how you're incorporating digital in it today. We'd love to carry on this conversation online as much as possible. All right, heroes. Well, again, thanks so much for being with me today. As always, if you enjoyed the podcast, go subscribe to it. It's on YouTube. It's on Apple, Spotify, other platforms as well. Go to it, click on the links in the show notes so you can subscribe to it. But we'd love for you to do that today. All right, heroes. Well, I hope you have a great rest of your day, a great rest of your week. And until next time, have a great one.